Good day. My name is Kathy Lester. I'm a public policy attorney in Washington, D.C., and have been working on the Medicare competitive bidding program for the last 20 years as part of my practice. I have worked with manufacturers, suppliers of all types and sizes, patient advocates, and healthcare professionals. Today, I want to share some information based on guidance that the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services issued in May about capacity and demand as they apply to the competitive bidding program. As a reminder, it is always important to consult the CMS and CBIC websites for the official guidance on these topics. That website is dmecompetitivebid.com. Also, as a reminder, this webinar is for educational purposes only and is not intended nor should be construed to be legal advice. My goal is to help you understand why capacity and demand are important in setting the payment rates for DME in the competitive bidding program, and that what you submit as capacity impacts the payment rates in the competitive bidding areas and the non-competitive bidding areas, including rule payment areas. Today, I hope to answer 5 specific questions for you. Why do capacity and demand matter? What is the role of capacity in bidding? How does CMS adjust bidders' capacity? What is the role of demand? And what is the impact of capacity in setting the payment rates? So let's begin. You may be asking yourself, why do capacity and demand matter when the focus of bidding is usually on the bid amount? While the bid amount is critically important, the way CMS has designed the competitive bidding program also makes what a bidder submits as its capacity just as important as the amount that bidder bids. Let me explain why. First, capacity is a critical component of what a bidder must provide to CMS, because CMS uses bidder capacity amounts to determine the maximum winning bid, which is essentially the clearing price for the lead item. CMS also uses the concept of beneficiary demand to help it determine the winning bid. These two numbers will influence the final rate just as much as the bid amount you submit will. Second, the maximum winning bid will set that single payment amount, or SPA, which you know as the rate that is used in the competitive bidding areas. While CMS sets the beneficiary demand, bidders submit their own capacity amounts. Thus, for bidders, thinking about your cost is not enough. You should also think about the capacity you submit with your bid. The greater the capacity amount you submit, the greater role your bid amount will have in the process of determining the final payment rate. This means if you bid more capacity than you can actually provide, this overestimation will mean that your bid amount will more likely drive the final payment rate. CMS has recognized this fact as well, and we will talk about how it may adjust capacity to avoid overestimation situations. But ultimately, it remains the bidder's responsibility to get that capacity number right. So let's drill down to the specifics of capacity first before we talk about demand. There are 2 amounts that make up a bidder's capacity. First, there is the historical capacity. This is the amount of the product you supplied during the most recent 12 months of Medicare claims data. The second part is what the bidder estimates its future capacity to be. This amount is the number of lead item products that you believe you can furnish in the competitive bidding area in 1 calendar year. Please note that CMS no longer requires expansion plans from bidders. CMS will review these estimates to determine if a bidder has overestimated its ability to increase its capacity to the levels it reports. This is called the ramp-up review, and the formula is the bidder's projected growth times the preliminary single payment amount. That number is then divided by the bidder's actual revenue to create a percentage. CMS is trying to determine if the bidder has sufficient funding to support the increase in its capacity. If a bidder is found not capable of furnishing items at the amount exceeding historic capacity, CMS will reduce the capacity. Once your historic and estimated capacity have been reviewed, CMS will select the higher of the 2 and list your bid amount with those of other bidders on an array. CMS ranks bidders from the lowest bid amount to the highest bid amount. CMS uses bidders' capacity to determine where all of the bidders' capacity equals demand, starting with the lowest bid and working up. The greater the bid capacity, the fewer the suppliers will be needed to establish a maximum winning bid. That may lead to a lower single payment amount and payment rate. This is the first step in setting that payment amount. Let me give you some examples. So let's start with scenario A in the upper left-hand corner. The bidders are ranked from lowest bid to highest with their capacity amounts. We will assume that demand is 100 units. Again, we will talk about demand in more detail in a minute. To figure out the maximum winning bid, CMS will review the bidder's capacity starting at the lowest bid. Once it has enough bidders with capacity to equal the demand, in this case 100 units, the maximum winning bid is set. So in scenario A, demand is met at bidder 4, which is highlighted in yellow. This means the maximum winning bid is $90. This amount will set the SPA in the particular CBA, as well as the rate in the non-CBAs, those defined as rule and not defined as rule. In the rule non-CBAs, the payment rate would be roughly $99, the SPA plus 10%. Now caution, this is just an illustrative example. CMS will actually use a regional SPA based on various CBAs, but the point remains the same. The SPA drives the non-CBA rates as well as the CBA rates. To see how important capacity is in setting the rate, let's look at scenario B. We will make the same assumption that demand is 100 units. In this case, however, demand is fulfilled at bidder 5, which you see in the lower right-hand corner. And that is because fewer bidders are needed to meet demand because the capacity was higher for each of the bidders at and below the maximum winning bid. Thus, without changing the bid amounts, the influence of each bidder's capacity amount can have a dramatic impact on the final payment rate. These two examples show the enormous influence that capacity that you submit will have on the rates. We have talked about how bidders can submit their capacity as part of the bidding process. It is also important to understand that CMS will review these numbers and may alter them. Let's walk through how that might happen. First, each bidder defines its estimated capacity. CMS will determine if the bidder meets the minimum financial threshold using the bidder's standard financial ratio, credit report, and credit score or rating. This is the subject of guidance just released by CMS in July. If the bidder meets the financial threshold, CMS will use the greater of the bidder's estimated capacity or its historic capacity. CMS caps the bidder's capacity at 20% of demand to make sure that there are at least 5 suppliers in each CBA for each product category. In some instances, CMS may adjust a bidder's estimated capacity down. If a bidder has no experience in the product category or CBA, CMS will adjust the capacity to 0. If the bidder has experience in both the product category and the CBA, CMS will use the highest capacity amount, the historic or the estimated. If the bidder has experience in providing the product category but not in the CBA, CMS will adjust the capacity with a formula and discount the estimated capacity. This is good news because it means that bidders with experience in the product category and location for supplying the products will have a greater weight in the determination of the final payment rate. This amount will allow for new entrants to come into the markets while recognizing that experienced bidders' bids are more likely to reflect the true cost of providing equipment and services in these areas. If a bidder's capacity is lowered and CMS determines that demand for the CBA and product category has not been met, then additional bidders will be added until the demand is met. This adjustment may increase the final payment amount. In sum, CMS's approach may result in your capacity being set at an amount higher or lower than what you estimate your capacity to be in a CBA. We understand that CMS intends to notify bidders if they adjust the bidder's capacity in such a way. Now let's turn to demand. As you can tell from the examples, beneficiary demand plays a critical role in setting the CBA rates. Demand is an amount that CMS creates for the purposes of setting the maximum winning bid amount. CMS will determine the beneficiary demand for each lead item. It will be the actual historic beneficiary utilization for each lead item increased by the estimated increase in the number of beneficiaries in the CBA and the estimated increase in utilization of the lead item in the CBA. CMS has published the actual historic beneficiary utilization of lead item by CBA. As we will see on the next few slides, the utilization report and the bid prep worksheet provide this information. The utilization report shows the average of the 2017 and 2018 historical data that CMS will use. The bid prep worksheet includes the expected growth for each lead item and the projected beneficiary demand. CMS calculates the projected beneficiary demand as follows. It takes the actual historic utilization times the increase in beneficiary times the increase in utilization. CMS has indicated that it will not allow this number to be negative. The next two slides show the guidance that CMS has provided to help you bid. Slide 8 is part of the CMS utilization report. It is something you will want to review closely. This report shows the state, the CBA name, then the HCPCS code for the lead item and the description. The next set of columns provide the utilization. That is what the beneficiary count and the allowed units are. Slide 9 is the bid prep worksheet. This is an example from CMS's document for CPAP and RAD devices. It also shows the state and CBA, then the lead item, HCPCS, and description. The next three columns show the average units allowed, then the CMS expected percent increase, and the 2021 projected demand, which is what CMS will use to set the maximum winning bid, ultimately the single payment amount. The last column is the bid limit. The final piece of the puzzle is the small supplier adjustment. This adjustment is required by statute. CMS applies this adjustment, as you can see from the slide, after setting the single payment amount. If CMS determines that less than 30% of the winning suppliers are small businesses, then it will add additional contract offers to small suppliers. But the payment amount will remain the same. Thus, it is possible that these small suppliers, if they accept the contract, will be accepting rates lower than their bid amounts. As we close, I want to return to the two examples we discussed earlier to remind you that what you bid is capacity, and what CMS ultimately defines as your capacity influences the single payment amount and the payment rate. These examples show that keeping the bid amounts the same and changing only capacity has a dramatic impact on the final rate. So, bid smart. Higher estimated capacity will reduce the number of bidders that CMS needs to get to the maximum winning bid. That will impact the final payment rate. Finally, a few takeaways to keep in mind. Your capacity will affect future payment rates. Know the demand for each lead item in the CBA. Know your historic capacity. Know what you realistically can provide in a CBA. Know that your capacity number will affect the single payment amount rate. Know that the single payment amount rate will become the non-CBA rate in areas not designated as rural. Also know that the single payment rate plus 10% will become the non-CBA rate in areas designated as rural. CMS will be using regional SPAs to determine the non-CBA rates, but it is essentially based on the single payment amounts that come out of the competitive bidding program. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this brief webinar has helped you better understand the role of capacity and demand in setting the rates in both CBAs and non-CBAs. Please remember to consult the CMS CBIC websites for more guidance on these topics as well. Thank you and have a good day.